good day, good night to all. We are back again with a special guest this fine sunny day. We have with us Robin Campbell from sunny Bristol. Um, and he is here to give us some information to promote events which is up and coming in Bristol, and to shed a little bit more light into who Robin Campbell is and how he stumbled across this flat Earth journey. So, Robin, if you can just introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself, and we'll take you from there.
Okay, so hi guys, thanks for having me on. So my name's Robin. I live in Bristol. I'm a family guy, and I've been in a IT profession for a good 20 years. I also run a property business on the side, and I've been into conspiracies, I guess, since 2009 as an investor in stocks and shares. One of my friends said, you should go on the forums. You get a lot of information on there about, the gossip and the rumors about certain stocks and shares. And I was just reading one of those threads once, and someone posted a link to The Money Masters by Bill Still. And I don't know if you've seen that documentary, but
Yes, indeed.
it
Very
totally
good documentary.
explodes the myths of the money system. And from that point on, I think the scale started to fall off. Fast forward a couple more years, and I think I clicked on a link which took me to Freedom to Fascism, which was another investor just sharing knowledge about the tax system. And it's a great documentary by a very, very credible guy called Aaron Russo, who's
Aaron Russo, yes,
yeah,
indeed. Yeah.
he's a film director, and he was running a very popular nightclub in the States, and Martin Luther King was just about to cause a real stir amongst the people. And when the police started clamping down, he allowed some of his the guys on the streets to take refuge in his nightclub. And as you can imagine, the authorities didn't like that, so they decided to go roughshod over his business and make life complete misery. And in feeling so, aggrieved about being a decent, in this documentary, there is no statute for the income tax, and it's a fascinating documentary. Anyway, fast forward another year, and I've now clicked on a link which took me to Loose Change. So we're up to 2010 now, and I think my eyes completely were wide open then to all things, because I could see if the governments were capable of killing to achieve an end of that scale and to cause such devastation under the premise of a seriously sickly lie, then I was open to a lot of things. And thankfully, I think I fast-tracked my education in all these things over the next 2 years. I think I went through a bit of a grieving process, as we all do. Like, we got to lose all of our attachments to things we once knew and trusted, and had to sort of reconfigure my brain to a lot of things. And then coming sort of a bit like previous guest Mark Sargent, you get conspiracy boredom, and you just figure out, okay, there's some good stuff out here that's positive. So I tended to lean towards the positive, and I was thinking about solutions. How can I be part of the solution? And one day, 2015 October, my daughter came back from work, and she said, one of my colleagues thinks the earth is flat. He's a bit of a conspiracy nut, so I thought you might like it. And I remember going, are you crazy or what? Come on, surely pictures in space, come on, it's that obvious. What about Felix Baumgarten's big high jump with the Red Bull jump? We've all seen the curvature, don't be silly. Anyway, Claire left me to get on with it, and within a few hours it was bothering me to a point where I thought, well, if someone else thinks this might be true, I think this deserves my investigation. And as with most of us, I think it took me about 2 weeks to finally get to a point where I couldn't challenge it anymore. And I think I watched the top 10 that most people quote, but short list was Mark Sargent's Clues, I think Dave Murphy's The Greatest Lie, some of my perspectives work, Eric Dubé's 200 proofs, and maybe one or two others. But I think the thing that got it for me was the lack of curvature, the things that we can see too far. And although at 2 weeks I felt very fresh into this, I didn't feel qualified to defend my position. So I thought I'd go underground for about 6 months until I learned it through and through. And at that point, I started to share the knowledge with very select few people. You know, my uncles and aunts are quite open-minded, and some of them were quite good about it, really. And my daughter-in-law, she actually became a flat earther pretty much overnight. She's a sharp cookie. I sent her links to the Sir Admiral Byrd's Operation Fishbowl and the Antarctic Treaty, and then Operation High Jump. So for those that may not know what that's about, it's the US prominent explorer of the time in the late 50s who'd spent 30 years exploring Antarctica to suddenly have his expedition stopped, having just told the world on a very prominent TV talk show that he'd discovered masses of land, loads of resources. It would be squabbled over for decades, you know, enough to power the world for 200 years in coal alone. And then all of a sudden his expedition stops. Shortly after the US and the Russians start to fire nuclear warheads up into the sky, to what seems to be see what the outer limits are above us, and that was Operation Fishbowl. And then shortly after that, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, which effectively militarized the outer limits of our flat plane of existence. And when you look into our Antarctic Treaty, you see it's pretty much locked down, super expensive to do anything about, and a bit like planning permission, where you say, you know, I want to put a shopping centre in a nice, quiet village green. you're going to get objections, and once you get objections, you can't go ahead with your expedition.
Yes. But I mean, what about those who would say that's nonsense what you're saying about Antarctica, because I've got a friend who has went there, and I've seen a picture of him next to that flag.
Yeah, interesting.
It said, yes.
Well, what is interesting about the routes that those explorers took is they show the path going possibly 200, 500 miles inland, but then they take the same path back. So if you think about the flat Earth model, that might be, let's say, the outer limits of this flat plane of existence would have thousands of miles beyond the outer perimeter. You could actually just go out beyond that, the same distance, do a U-turn and come back, and you've effectively done what most people would consider enough to get to the center. But the reality is there's an official South Pole, which isn't magnetic south by any means, because I don't think one exists. And there's also a sort of ceremonial flag that people are led to by the military. They're escorted there to ensure they don't have any ulterior, another agenda to go elsewhere. And that's what your photo opportunity will take you to. And therefore, it's pretty much locked down.
Mm-hmm.
And with regards to the Antarctic Treaty, if you were a billionaire and you wanted to just have a go, you would be shut down really quickly. There's people that have tried it accidentally and on purpose, and they've been pretty much forcefully led back to the mainland. So it's pretty hard to do without the beady eyes of authority all over what you're doing.
Oh, definitely. So in regards to sort of rich billionaires and potentially trillionaires being sort of stumbling across that, is there any sort of articles or news reports that we can cite, or names of people potentially who've sort of tried to do that?
Yeah, I think I don't know them to hand, but if you were to look up Explorer is forced to turn back Antarctica, I think you'd find some in the last 5 years. With regards to understanding how forceful the legislation is around the Antarctic Treaty, I would look up a YouTube video called Antarctica is Closed, and it was done by a guy, I think it's Taboo Conspiracy is his channel, and he goes into detail about the clauses within that treaty, and how each layer makes it even harder and harder to get anywhere near the Antarctic without a ridiculous amount of bureaucracy, and it's just so prohibitive. Even with $2 million and a good business plan and something that seems to have an honourable intent, you still need the authority from all 50 plus nations on the piece of paper that signs you off. So can you imagine? It's a bit like trying to get your own business agenda into the UN committee. It's going to be impossible.
Very much so, very much so. Very tall battle that will be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with regards to billionaires and so on, I really do hope that someone who's a bit, I don't know, rebellious, but has funds to burn, might one day get a powerful drone aeroplane that could, do 10,000, 5,000 miles all on its own. Yeah. And see what happens. Be willing to let the hardware crash or not come back, but at least send pictures back and do a reconnaissance mission and, do something on behalf of truth. I think that's perfectly feasible because I don't think these things are exorbitant in costs. I would have thought you could get, a reconnaissance drone up in the air for a few $100,000, and to a billionaire who wants to know the truth. I think you might be willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think you'd need to employ sort of stealth technology or so, because the airspace around there is going to be very much sort of guarded and monitored, isn't it?
I think you're right. Not quite sure how it's going to be done, but those are one of the things that might be the deal breaker for the globe Earth. But I think there are easier ones to crack without troubling yourself too much with that one. Although I'd still like to see it. It's probably more expensive than others.
Well, I think, as you say, I think that's very feasible. It's very a feasible thing, and you're not actually putting anyone's life in danger by doing that. It's just, as you say, laws and treaties, etc. And if it's legal and lawful, etc. All of those type of ideas and tricks.
Yeah, it'd be a good one to pretend to be an ecological expedition. To unveil a stealth drone from your rucksack.
There you go. Here's one I made earlier.
Yeah, no, that would be great. That would be great.
Yeah. So, just taking a step back, have you always been sort of pretty open to alternative news? I'm not going to say conspiracy theories, because that's a very broad and very watered down sort of label now. So going back, were you pretty open to alternative views and understandings, or did it come with maturity and age kind of thing?
I think it's a combination of being quite a sensitive chap in my 20s, and quite, I wouldn't say sheltered, but didn't really have an interest in politics, and I didn't really have an interest in religion per se. And I think what did it for me was the very matter-of-fact post in this investor forum, because when you're trying to invest, you've got to cut through the bullshit. All of the press and the media will spin a story, but the investors have really got to get to the nub of it, because that's where they're putting their money. And that's why this first film that I watched really was quite a big impact on me, because I had no concept of the scale of any sort of corruption. I knew corruption existed, but I didn't know it was all pervasive. And when you look at the bill still, and you look at the whole of money is controlled, that's one hell of a pill to swallow, isn't it? And the whole way the world works obviously revolves around money. So I thought I was fairly switched on in a sense that I was, to most people's eyes in the mainstream and in the world, they probably see me as a sort of fairly normal sort of guy, quite successful in a job. I went contracting, I increased my income, I took the family away for holidays, I was in a reasonable house, a fairly average sort of guy, doing reasonably well by most people's standards. However, I realised that kind of smart really wasn't wide awake by any means, and I think it needed someone to prompt me with a reality check like that for me to start waking up. So I think I'm willing to look into things and not dismiss them, but to actually, I think some people use the word triangulate, and by that I mean go and corroborate what you've just read by checking it elsewhere, and
Yes.
looking at 2 or 3 independent sources that might lead you to the conclusion. And suddenly, internet in 2010 was just exploding with all sorts of junk as well. So I think I was cautious and wary that I didn't want to go down the wrong rabbit holes and be branded a loony. But
Which could be easily done in this society over the last 10 years or so. I totally agree with that.
yeah, my family, like I said, my uncles and aunts are brilliant. They're really open-minded. And one of my cousins is totally awake as well, which is fab. But I do get the rolling eyes and the Robin started again at family gatherings. So I do tend to limit it now just to the ones that I know I can share a bit. And that's just like you say, just getting a bit wiser with age, I think.
Without a doubt. I think with most people, and I think to be fair, it seems to be a very common trend of the tipping point, which changed people's sort of perception on reality, on what is real and what is quote unquote not real.
Yes.
And it always seems to stem from, I mean, I could be out by a few percentile, but it's in the high 90% of 9/11. If it wasn't, literally on that year 2001, September 11th, it was very shortly preceding that. The events surrounding it, the investigations, etc., seems to be a very catalyzing event, which sprung people into, okay, I'm going to start to research and look again, and as you say, triangulate, utilize critical thinking, not just hear what's been presented via the media and by print media. Actually ask people, look on YouTube. I mean, back in 2002, I guess, when I arose slightly out of my bed and kind of poked my head out the sheets and was thinking, what's going on here, eh? And, as you say, back in 2002, there was so much misinformation on the internet, but also there was a lot of good information, but it took a lot of time to search through to realize, oh, actually, this is someone talking a load of rubbish. This is, correct information kind of thing.
Do you know, one of the things that I found most useful was podcasting, because I listened to a guy called Richard Groves, who was a 9/11 whistleblower. He was part of the financial industry, and he called into Maria Heller, if you've heard of her. She's a New York alternative media channel, and the longest running podcast on the internet, I believe.
Wow.
And Maria Heller gave Richard Groves some airtime on her show back in 2000, I think it was 4. And Richard's story is he was due to meet his boss of Marsh McLennan and some colleagues on the 95th floor of the North Tower, and he was running a bit late, and the boss decided to work from home that day and scheduled a teleconference with his colleagues. And Richard Grove was due to present evidence that he saw a load of insider dealing in what was American Airlines shorting, and he could see a lot of insider dealing in the insurance world around the insurance of the building. And lo and behold, he was late. You knew what happened next, and then he saw World Trade Center 6 from the basement. He saw a load of US Army trucks just hightailing it out of there in the wrong direction. And something just struck him as, this is wrong. Everything about this is wrong. He drove away for obvious reasons, and then he reported back and found himself caught up in a whistleblowing situation where he went to Bill Binney, if you know him from the US. He he was someone who went through the channels at the CIA and NSA to blow the whistle on some other thing a few years before, and Richard Grove tried to go through channels and he was silenced as well. So what happened with his podcast is it went on for probably 5 years, and he did what was the equivalent of I call it a degree level in critical thinking, because he went so deep into so many subjects. But it stopped me listening and watching, stuff that could have taken me down lots of different diversions. And instead, what I got was really good content. One of the best ones I can remember was the American history lesson by one of his guests, which was John Taylor Gatto, spelled Gatto, a famous guy.
I've heard the name, but I don't think I've actually. I'll have to revisit that one, to be fair. I've heard the name, I don't think I've.
He's awesome because he does like a 5-hour interview broken into different 1-hour chunks on the history of education in America and how it's based on the Prussian education system.
Yeah.
How the bursaries of all of the universities essentially control what goes on the syllabus. And John Taylor Gatto was famous for teaching children how to think for themselves and think critically. And he goes into the trivium method, which you may have heard of, and it's a method of thinking critically. And I always remember what he said. He says, I argue with myself until there's no more contradiction left. And then what I know I've got left is pretty much bound to be the truth. And I like that. So yeah, my education back into this subject matter was highly guided by, on the whole, podcasts, which is dead useful because it's a curation of good content, and it keeps you doing stuff. Like you can do it whilst you're doing the gardening or the shopping or out on a journey. So
exactly,
it's great. I look forward to going shopping these days because I'm always getting an education when I'm doing it.
Well, as I try and say, you're not living if you're not learning, kind of thing. So you should strive each day to try and gauge or obtain some new form of information in some capacity. So that is definitely a good way of doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And
I tend to do it whilst I listen to either audio books or, as you say, podcasts whilst I'm cooking or washing up, or, as you say, the manual tasks. If you're out driving, sometimes rather than listening to music, put a podcast or an audio book in, and it's absolutely wonderful.
I know that is good, and I used to really resent being in the car, but now I don't. It's fine. I've got a long journey tomorrow, and I'll be doing it getting on for 3 hours as I go up to Manchester, but. It's all good, and I think when you listen to good guests and good shows, you get introduced to other material, and that expands your horizons again.
Yes.
So, some great podcasts out there, some really, really good ones.
Definitely. Do you still listen to, or have you listened to? I'm sure you have. Coast to Coast.
Yes, I love Coast to Coast. And it's hearing the experiences of someone who's trodden a path different to you that keeps your feet on the ground, really, because you're doing the equivalent of traveling with them, aren't you? And seeing their little scrapbook of memories and knowledge and learnings. And hey, we're lucky, really, because before you had to be an active learner and go to the library, but now you can be more of a passive learner, but select the things you want to be interested in. So I feel quite lucky with the technology, really. It's good, really, really good.
It's a gift and also a curse, because as you highlighted, back, let's say 20, 30 years ago, the knowledge was obtained verbally or physically going to somebody or going to a library or purchasing a specific book, reading it, underlining it, etc., and really absorbing that information. So you respected it more because of the trials and tribulations. Sometimes, I know of people who've done 6-hour sort of round trips to go and get specific books that they want, going up to Scotland and places like that. So it's having that respect for the knowledge and the information. At the same time, if you do have that, now with the age of technology, that isn't necessarily needed. So on one hand, you'll have people who haven't experienced that, who have access to the information, but they don't respect the knowledge or the information, so it means nothing to them.
It can be. You have to catch yourself, I think, and acknowledge it, because, like you say, it devalues the quality and the effort that someone's been putting into something. So yeah, it's very easy. I mean, I've fallen prey to that a lot, because I've got a business interest where I'm on social media, and then I've got now flat Earth interest that I'm on social media, and I've got my own sort of just hobbies and other interests that I'm on social media. So yeah, the wife who's not up with all this stuff just pulls me up on it sometimes, and I have to admit I'm bashful at that moment and putting my phone down. Sorry, love. You're quite right.
Surely, Robin, you're not the one who's taking all of those pictures of foods and stuff like that.
No. I wish it was. It's just I'm making excuses now, but no, I do get distracted, and that's all it is, a distraction.
Easily, but the brain does need it from time. Some people sort of with de-stress going to the gymnasium, jogging, playing football, some form of sports, meditation, etc. And other people, it's social media, or it's eating, it's cooking. Everyone needs a vice ultimately. It could be drinking alcohol, smoking, everyone needs a vice.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. So
go on, sorry.
I was going to say, so did you want to move into some of the subjects around the flat Earth again, where we were talking about?
Yes, most definitely. I mean, I wanted to really get an understanding of. You read my mind. I think we must be telepathically linked at the moment, because that was my next segue. To be fair,
Okay.
Just give us an understanding I guess, of your view, because I guess, well, for the listeners, I guess, they may not know about, there's multiple different sort of theories and ideas about how this flat Earth is, if it's an infinite plane, if there is multiple versions on a huge sort of dish-like object. Is there a dome, etc.? So let's get into sort of what your thoughts are behind the this plane that we're on and
Okay.
covered.
Okay, well, bear in mind I have to speculate, because we haven't got the budget or the team and the resources to go and actually scientifically prove this yet. But based on a few things that I can reference now, I think we live in an enclosed system that, and I'll try and guess the dimensions in a minute, but the dome itself probably goes very much wider than we think. So given Sir Admiral Byrd's testimonial of some land the equivalent the size of America, is his actual words, we're talking thousands of miles east, west, north and south potentially of the outer perimeter. And I think they did hit some kind of perimeter, otherwise they wouldn't have rushed back after 30 years with all of the US's military might alongside him. I just can't see why they would suddenly stop when he was telling the world, we've got resources to go after here. They must have stopped, even though they knew there was lots of resources to go and exploit. So I'm guessing 2, 3, maybe 5,000 miles maximum outside the perimeter, we've got an edge of some description. And given the sun doesn't travel much beyond there, or doesn't travel beyond the outer perimeter, it would be very hard to conceive of an easy, habitable environment, given that we also know the Antarctic is totally different climate to the North Pole, and there's no flora and fauna in the Antarctic, and it's pretty much always sub-zero. So the outer perimeter going up, I have seen various amateur rockets go up and hit something at 72 to 80 miles. That doesn't mean it stops there. It could mean there's some kind of liquid or something up there that's stopping a projectile going up. It doesn't do it in a way that speaks of solid either. Otherwise, that rocket footage we've all seen, I hope you've seen it, it doesn't smash. It should smash if it was hard. But then I've got the conundrum.
Robin, are you referring to the footage of that rocket spinning up very fast and then it hits something of sorts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we look at the amateur balloon footage, we always go up to about 120 to 130 plus a few thousand feet. And then the balloon hits something or pops, and that's it. It's game over for the balloon, and we don't get any higher. Equally, we've seen high altitude footage from sort of the MiGs, Russian fighters, and the high altitude jet planes of the US in the 70s and 80s. They got to 130 plus a few thousand feet before the temperature got so hot they couldn't survive, and the engines started to cut, so they had to come back down again. So I think we've got an atmospheric, magnetic, some kind of barrier there, but I don't know how tall that then rises to, given the sun and the moon are supposed to be inside the firmament here with us, which makes them, if they could survive inside the next tier up from our survival, then they could be anywhere between, I call it 80 miles up to a couple of thousand miles up. And then I believe the stars, because I've studied sonoluminescence a little, I'm pretty convinced that the stars and the luminaries are vibrating sound within a liquid.
I've heard that.
So if you go on YouTube and search this now, just look up sonoluminescence and the planets or the stars, and you'll see some great experiments of people putting an electrical charge through water, sound through water, and at a certain burst and frequency of sound, it creates an igniting spark almost within the water. And looking at stars today through P900s and high power telescopes, the stars very much look like shimmering objects, as with sonoluminescence. So I think somewhere between 100 miles and, who knows, a couple of thousand miles, we've got sound penetrating through liquid. And Werner von Braun, who was the director of NASA, an ex-Nazi rocket scientist who was squirreled into the US under Operation Paperclip.
Paperclip, yes.
Yes, his headstone on his grave says, there's a Bible quote which says, "The firmament declares his handiwork." So I'm thinking, I can't go too spiritual here. I could do a little bit, I suppose, but what I'm thinking is heavenly sounds are creating the stars, and we don't really need to go up much beyond a couple of thousand feet, maybe, and then we're enclosed. Because I find it also hard to believe that we've got an eternal distance up above us, given that air itself needs to be contained, and we, as flat Earth students, we don't believe in gravity, and we don't believe that space, which is a negative pressure system, being a vacuum, can sit alongside a positive pressure system, the atmosphere, without ripping it off, because it's seriously powerful. So by that token, I think the Earth's atmosphere is contained, and the firmament is written about in many ancient scriptures across many cultures and civilizations. So I'll go along with enclosed because of the wisdom of those previous societies and some knowledge today. Operation Fishbowl was about firing up some missiles until they hit. And I'm triangulating here, and I'm trying to speculate, because that's all it is. It's a speculation, because I can't prove it myself. But given the behaviour of Admiral Byrd and then NASA with Operation Fishbowl and Project Dominic, I think those two activities tell me they found a perimeter. They sectioned it off with the Antarctic Treaty. Then they found the outer perimeter, and then they militarized that by creating NASA, and then they become the authority for all things space and give us our blue marble nonsense from 1971 onward.
Could you just refresh my memory, maybe the listeners?
Yeah.
Project Dominic. I don't recall that one. What was that?
Yeah, so Dominic with a K on the end is the overarching project for Operation Fishbowl, and
Ah,
it's the project rather than the operation. So they're both one and the same thing, but I think under Project Dominic there were one or two other things they tried. And
yeah.
Operation High Jump was when Sir Admiral Byrd had to go up the 200-foot ice wall and then climb up the peaks of Antarctic to find out what happened next. What was
Yeah.
beyond the perimeter.
What happens outside of the Truman Show, as Mark Thomas says.
Yeah. And you can bet your bottom dollar once you find the edge, you want to know what the hell's outside, and that's what they did next. They exhibited exactly Truman's behaviour of like, how do we get out? Where are we?
Did you ever catch that series on Netflix, Under the Dome?
I didn't actually. I think that's the one that D. Marble watched with his girlfriend, and he wanted.
Yes.
He was thinking, I've done my Netflix binge with his girlfriend. What next? Let's see what's on YouTube. Under the Dome. Lo and behold, was Mark Sargent's clues, flat Earth clues. He took the red pill by accident, poor soul.
Oh, it's again for the listeners. It's a very interesting look into sci-fi program. I think they did 2 seasons maybe of it, but
Okay.
yeah, if we look at that and amplify that rather than it being localized into on a city or a little town, picture that whole scenario for this firmament that Robin is talking about.
Yeah, I need to watch that for just the little Easter eggs that are in those films.
There is a lot. There is a lot in there. To be fair, there is a lot, and also it sort of it can raise some questions within the flat Earth community. I mean, I don't know how seriously it was taken, but just reviewing it with a flat Earth perspective could raise some additional questions or some more ideas of experiments, etc.
Okay, well, it's worth a watch. I'll give it a go.
Definitely. So what is your theory? If we are enclosed,
yes.
What's outside of the dome?
Goodness me, there's a $6 million question. Absolutely no idea, but it changes a lot of things when you realize you are enclosed and you have a designed, perfectly balanced ecosystem within it, and it makes you feel, yeah, we could be somebody's experiment, but we could also be, the permaculture, the perfectly balanced vivarium that our creator has given us to enjoy. And so from that perspective, it changes a lot. But outside the dome, I've got no idea, Noble. I haven't got a Scooby-Doo.
I've heard that many speculations. I think aliens have been brought into the fray as well. Extraterrestrial life, etc. If they're basically transporting themselves through the dome rather than actually physically coming through and stuff like that.
Can you remember Mark Sargent's talk sometimes about using night vision goggles?
Oh, yes.
The night owl. I need to look some of those up because I fancy getting some of those and having a look myself. Because for those that are listening, he shares the story of seeing all sorts of things going off in space and up in the sky.
I think there is actually, I'm sure there is actually footage of it on YouTube where someone's taking images of it. But again, I would like to do the same thing, but those goggles, to get a good pair, they're not the cheapest. So they're not the cheapest.
Fair enough.
But, depending on what your disposable income is, it might be obtainable.
Could be. I'll have a look. But, the same goes for most flat earthers. They think I'm going to need a P900 now. And, as a good networker, I'll probably just find one or two friends that have them who can help me out.
Exactly. That's the one. That's definitely the one. So
So,
your thoughts on aliens?
um,
Are you pro or anti-alien life forms?
I never really did the whole alien research thing, so I don't really have a view on it, if I'm honest. Mark Sargent says he hasn't ruled it out. I don't know enough really to qualify either way. At this point, I'll probably leave that thought on the shelf because I just don't know enough. That's my
Yes.
honest answer.
Okay. Okay. So another question would be around, I guess, triangulation and critical thinking again. Now
Yeah.
we've just discussed the dome and being enclosed, etc.
Hmm.
Will that then should raise questions about who or what created it? Has that sort of turned you more into a spiritual person? And if so, were you a more religious person per se previous?
I mentioned in my early 20s, I had um, a spiritual experience. I reached out to God at age 22, and I had a very physical manifestation of something supernatural in the room that I was at home, and I can never have that taken away. It was a very special moment, and I thought the logical thing here is to join a church, which in the end I did. And I'm lucky because I met my wife through the church relationships I had, but more
Excellent.
so, more so recently, probably going back 10 years now, because I'm 52 now. I married my wife age 25. And about 10 years ago, I just got a little bit disillusioned, probably because I was trying to share information about the rise of Satan and his influence in the earth. And he is pretty active at the minute.
Oh yeah, most
I, could,
definitely.
I couldn't see any willing participants in this conversation, so I thought I'd prefer to detach myself from organised religion and organised groups of people. Although I do love them still, they're lovely people and their heart's in the right place. I've then come up against things that have really challenged what I believe is the history of humanity. So, if you've ever done any research on the ancient pyramids and ancient history,
Oh yes,
it
yes.
just boggles your brain. We are definitely in another iteration of human existence, and how many iterations? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know how many. And I've been listening to a couple of other guys. I don't know if you know the Crow House.
No.
The Crow House. What's his name? It'll come to me in a second. Martin Leaker, who was at the UK conference, the Flat Earth conference,
Okay. Hmm.
he's doing a lot on like revisionist history, but also the mud floods of the 1810, 11, and 12 that wiped out a load of towns and cities across Ukraine, Italy, a lot of Europe, and some in the US as well, where it's obvious that the architecture of the pre-1810 mud flood belonged to a different era, and then everything after that seemed to just be an incremental sort of
Okay.
lurch out of the mud. In other words, they didn't have the sophistication prior to the 1800 mud floods, and they seem to be borrowing the architecture from a previous iteration. So I'm
Mm.
struggling. That I don't have enough evidence to really jump on board that train yet, but it's significant enough for me to think something really fishy did happen a couple of hundred years ago. And there are those that are saying that the human race has had quite a number of challenges and wipeout events through its history, and I struggle to see how the traditional timeline of the Bible and other scriptural books really fits into that, given that we know Bible's got changed by Constantine, Bible's got scriptures got changed. And
Well, when you say change, let's be crystal clear for everybody. When you
yeah,
say change, are you saying that the Bible, whether we're talking about the 66 books or the canonized version, are that we all know that the original scripts were not in English, so we know that they have to have been translated and also transliterated.
Yes,
So
I'm talking
are we
about.
saying outside of that?
I think we're talking, from my perspective, about the removal of the Book of Enoch and
Okay.
some of the other
Yeah.
books,
Gotcha.
and the Roman Empire certainly capitalized on um, their version of
Hmm.
the scripture at that point.
Yeah.
So, if I'm just to rewind to back when you first asked the question, I know that I have a living creator with me, and I know that I
Oh,
have an awesome designer who puts things together in such an amazing way
oh yeah.
to to start to buy into a Big Bang and evolution. I really struggle with that because you can't
Well, when
you
go
can't
on.
you just can't get from A to Z without a million increments, and we don't see any of those increments, and that alone throws evolution out for me. And a Big Bang, something from nothing, requires more faith than it requires a lot of faith to go there, and way more than looking at the actual evidence and the blueprint of a designer outside my very window now. So
It's
I,
sheeple who have that chain of thought. It's sheeple because, as you say, a bang from nothing. Okay, so we can win the lottery a million times, and that's still not going to be able to sort of magnify that event taking place. So that event has taken place, but then we've still got a catalogue of systems and chances for life to form for single cell organisms and stuff. It just seems, well, we it doesn't seem, it's just a crock of not even wives' tales of scientists' tales is what it is.
yeah. So I try to stay grounded, Noble, because I know that if I wanted to, I could go back to a nice, very lively church who put their arms around me and my wife, and we could be there for the rest of our lives. However, if I'm to be intellectually honest and try and follow where the truth takes me, I'm seeing things today that are slightly in conflict with the way the church has organised themselves today. But equally, I want to leave myself open to the possibility, that now, things are going to start revealing themselves more and more. The more
Mhm.
we're peeling back these layers of, I mean, I look back 4 years ago and think, crumbs, I actually bought the Global Eye hook, line, and sinker. No one could have told me otherwise. I'd have called them, I'd have called them a loony. But because we've got this material that's so well put together online now,
Yeah.
this is just one, I think, of many layers that we're going to be peeling back, and I think there's quite a few more to come. I think we'll be finding there's more things that we've got the capacity to take on now.
Mm.
Flat Earth is not an easy one to swallow. It's quite triggering, and it does trigger your programming, and it makes you you can witness emotions bubbling up, anger and resentment,
Oh yeah.
and you think, well, where's that come from? That's got to be from somewhere. And
It's
what
an
it is,
auto-programmed character which has been implanted and embedded from when you were young and have been trained to hold these lies to be truth.
yeah, no, that's right. And it takes time for them to bubble up and free up, if you like, and let go of them. But once you've dealt with flat Earth and you've figured out how to live your life with it and what changes that means, because there's quite a few that have to come into play, then you organise your own activity along with that, and that's where we come along to the meetup in the end. Or I think the first thing for me is I went to the conference in April, and I really wanted to get along to a meetup before that, but it just didn't happen. And I made a resolution this year that I would start one up, and that's what's happened. And all sorts of things have happened since.
Excellent. Excellent. Before we segue into the conference,
Yes,
two questions.
yes.
Um, what did was you so like 25 years ago, was you a 7-day Adventist?
No,
What
no.
sort of
I belong to what you would call today a Pentecostal or charismatic church.
Wow. Okay.
So for those that know what I'm talking about, the gospel involves coming to Christ through a confession and redemption, and that's if you look at today's denominations, we've got several. The Methodist Church and those kind of denominations focus quite heavily on that. Then you've got Pentecostal churches which talk about baptism in the Spirit, and the apostles in the upper room had an experience where the wind of heaven came down on them, and they spoke in tongues of fire and angels, and people thought they were talking in other languages when they heard them, and when they went out into the square outside, they carried on talking in those tongues, and some people could understand what they were saying in a different language. But what the Pentecostals believe in is the gifts of the Spirit, and there's about a dozen gifts which empower someone to walk in the Spirit and actually deliver the word of God and deliver the outworkings of God's calling on their lives, and to lead churches and to lead others and administer the Spirit of God in their own lives. And what the charismatic churches were quite heavy in doing in the 90s and 2000s was starting up home groups and churches that met in school buildings or town halls, so that they could then grow when they reached a certain size. And when I was in Harrogate, I used to live in Yorkshire, I had my experience that I mentioned earlier, and some guys came across from Wakefield, Halifax, Hull, Leeds, York, Bradford, who were going to start a new church based on a group of churches that all had this charismatic thing. And I was one of their first fruits. So by that I mean I was the first guy who rocked up to their first service. And from that day on, I had a very, very powerful experience working with some top guys who really knew their stuff. And one of the best churches in the UK, I think, is Abundant Life in Bradford.
I've heard of that name. Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it?
It's absolutely awesome. So, I look fondly back on those times, and, maybe one day I will go back. But at this point in time, I see more in common with flat earth people, because they've had the onion layers peeled back in their minds, and they're consciously much more awake than a lot of people in churches, though I love them dearly.
Indeed. Yes. My other question would be relating to your response relating to the biblical view on world or the plane's history and the pyramids. So in your mind, what are you thinking, or what are your thoughts on the age of this plane?
Crumbs. I think if you followed the first the Old Testament, there is a genealogy.
Sure. Yeah.
They're in Chronicles. I think if you add up all the books and all the ages of all the kings going back, it is only about 10,000, I think, from memory. So you could go back to, I think it's 10,000 years ago, so that would be 8,000 years BC. And, if we then fast forward to the days of Noah, just prior to that, there was the, forgetting the name, the Nephilim, and there was the Nephilim, and they talked about, giants, the Watchers and things. So I think we were dealing with potentially an iteration of humanity that was mucking about with gene splicing and things like that. They were mucking about where they shouldn't.
Yeah.
So they got a good spanking really in the end, didn't they? And Noah had to start again, and off we go. So I think humanity from a scriptural point of view is probably 10,000 years from now going back. And what I'm reading with Martin Leaker and I can't remember his name now, the Crow House and others, there's a great Russian researcher who's doing the Russia and Ukraine from the perspective of the mud flood. There might be a controlling influence here that knows how to scratch us out and start again, which is not very inspiring, but it's a possibility.
It's humbling, but if you go back, also go back to the Torah, Genesis.
Yes.
Genesis 1, after the earth has been made, etc. It says the Elohim, which is a
Yes.
plural. So the angels let us come down to earth and let us make man in our own image, etc., etc. And it
Okay.
goes on to Genesis 25. And then God said, let me make man in my own image. And then the difference between those two verses is it's pluralized, so it's angels, in my opinion,
Yes.
could be interpreted as it's definitely more than one being creating these form that was on the earth.
Okay.
Now, again, in Genesis, it's 1,000 years between each event of sorts.
Okay.
So on the seventh day, which is the Shabbat, he then blew into the nostril after forming man from the dust. Adam and then Eve blew the ruach into the nostril, which is the breath of life. So then we've got 1,000 years before Adam and Eve was created, before these Genesis 1 creation was made. So in my studies, that would fill in the gaps to where these kingdoms and these places were built that we're kind of finding these pyramids and all these kind of monolithic structures.
Understood. But something's just got left out of some of these scriptures where they don't go into the level of technology we must have had. But then I don't suppose it's necessary. But it would be really helpful.
Would you think, if you're thinking about it, and I'll let you continue. If you're thinking about it, it's some people will call it an instruction manual, but I don't think they would go to that level of detail to say, okay, we're using diamond cut, edged swords to cut this thing down. They're going to give you the length and the breadth, etc., heights, etc., elves, 20 elves and all those kind of things. But I don't think they're going to go into the precise building and making of stuff, in my opinion.
I'm being selfish because I just want to know how. And they built these enormous structures, and we don't know how to do it today. That's the mind-boggling thing. But if we've had iterations before that are now gone by, and we've had to start from scratch, then we can't really tell, apart from stone records, what's happening. It's only stone that'll survive beyond 10,000 years. So that's why, I find everything older than that really fascinating. I don't know how else you're going to preserve what's happened.
Well, again, a lot of the stuff was done orally, wasn't it? Before, papyri, and before that, it would have been stone carvings, etc. Pre that, we're talking, and this is what's purported, finger paintings and caves and that kind of stuff. So people have tried to, leave some form of record, but with time, environmental differences, etc., floods, that stuff can go.
The one thing I find fascinating is I've been to Luxor and Karnak, and I've seen the huge stone structures there. Some of them 1,200 tons. That must have been physically ridiculous to get out of the quarries. And then the precision at which these quite random shapes sometimes are laid, such that an earthquake wouldn't unsettle them. They might move and then they'll slot back again because they're not in a perpendicular structure, they're in an angular structure. And that same building technique is mimicked in Peru, in Chichen Itza, in Turkey, and I find it fascinating because we've got structures that line up with one another, ignoring the transit of humans across continents. They just do. They line up, and the stone building technique is the same, and it makes you wonder, crumbs, was it a big continent at one point, or did they have transport that we know nothing about today? So it's fascinating.
It's definitely one or the other. I mean, the scientists have spoken about the Pangea model, etc., and that model's supposed to work. Apparently, if you put all of the pieces back together, it forms nicely that one big landmass.
Seems sensible. Yeah, it seems sensible. I'll go with that until someone can come up with a good solution. But yeah, it is fascinating. Human history is super fascinating. And
we can talk for hours upon hours, and we can go into so many different angles and avenues in that respect. It's, as you say, it's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I've seen Graham Hancock. I've been to see him live. He was promoting one of his books, but he's not a flat earther, which I find really frustrating. He's
No, watch this space. Watch this space.
because he's really good. He's really open-minded, and he's a proper student of what really happened rather than what we're told happened. And I think it would be great to see someone like him turn around. You never know. I think pressure's building on a lot of these guys.
It is, and I think it's going to take for a few more really big sort of people to mention it, or say, oh, I've heard about this theory going around, and I'm maybe going to look into it and see what the fuss is about, kind of thing, and that may prompt a few more sort of well-renowned or well-respected sort of celebrities or people in certain fields to actually say, actually, let's look at this seriously. Then, if they're going to do it, let's actually seriously examine this rather than take the mick.
Yeah. No, I'll look forward to those days when that happens.
Definitely. So, with all the hard work you've been doing, all the research, all the studying, you've been to a conference last year. But is it just the one, or you went to two, wasn't it, last year?
Yeah, it was April this year. I didn't go to the US one in November, in Denver, Colorado, but I did go to the Birmingham one this year with my wife in April, and that was hosted over 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, towards the end of April. It was a really great event. We all stayed in hotels and we all had food put on by the event. There was lots of great speakers and amazing networking, and just a great place to celebrate all of that hard work that everyone's put in, and actually go and find like-minded people who may have sat at home or had the odd conversation online, but not actually met anyone in person. And I found it also quite transformational in that I think it created a permission to talk about it in the mainstream, and that then had a knock-on effect that all sorts of other media outlets then felt the license to be able to pick it up. And sitting next to me in the hall was the Telegraph, the Times, Esquire magazine, and one or two others that I gave interviews to.
Great.
And I thought it was good, really. I mean, given that the subject is pretty vulnerable to some pretty cruel attacks, I thought we came out reasonably well, considering. And the guys that ended up on Good Morning Britain with Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby, even though Holly and Phil pulled some pretty funny faces, I think on the whole the guys did pretty well. They kept it rooted.
Yeah,
they kept it rooted in reality and made sense, and I'm glad they didn't go off into Pac-Man and Cosmic Egg, because they could have done, and then may have lost a bit of momentum. And
totally.
Back to the conference. I think the conference really was for those that had done quite a few miles themselves in research. And day one was quite advanced. I found my wife was struggling with some of that subject matter because it's pretty deep. But by the time we got to the end of the first day and into the second day, it picked right back up again and became much lighter and easier. And I thought two sections which really stood out for me were Dave Murphy's doing Debunking the Debunker, which was very good, just factual and simple and straightforward and well presented. And then the guys at the end did a debate with some scientists, so young students graduating. So I qualify that statement as graduating, but pretty intelligent guys, very very humble. They've been given the questions in advance, but they were found lacking, bless them, in quite a few of the challenging questions that the guys left for them. But in their humility, and good credit to them, they admitted when they couldn't give an answer. But some of the questions were pretty good. Things like, how does a vacuum coexist besides an atmospheric pressure system? And what about the gyroscope on an aeroplane? Why is it main rigidity in space, and yet the artificial horizon in a plane never dips? To show
they did try and answer that one, didn't they?
They did, and
Bless them.
they did feel that gravity had a bearing on this thing, but that isn't the case. And I thought they did well considering. And it takes a brave scientist to go to a convention full of people who don't have the same view as you. And one thing I do know from personal experience is they came away from that conference with a positive story about the flat Earth people, that we were very warm and very open. And I know that because one of the guys who's approached me to do a short film documentary went to Imperial College where the guys were studying. So he's spoken to them personally. So it's quite an interesting feedback loop to bring back to the the aftermath of the event.
Totally. So as a result, that has now clearly spurred you now to take this from sunny Birmingham and have an event in Bristol.
Yeah, that's right. So in April, I already decided I want to set up a meetup before the event, before the UK conference. And so on the 14th of April, I think it was, I did my first meetup. And it went really well. I had 20 people. Some had come from London, from Birmingham, from Glastonbury. And we had a brilliant night. And we shared loads of good stories about our journeys. We really made a good connection. And what was great was the following month, lots of those people came back, even from London. And as each month goes by, we're growing in numbers, and we've got some good connections and relationships going already. But it seems to be growing each month. And as a spin-off from doing the meetup, because I'm on meetup.com, I think people do searches for flat Earth meetups. The media and people who want to do films. We'll come to that in a second, but I have been approached by 2 or 3 people who want to create films and documentaries. But the meetup now continues, and we've decided that we want to go out and do a bit of street activism. So a couple of events that are coming up is the next Bristol meetup is this weekend. That's Saturday, the 14th of July, and it'll be at the Punch Bowl Tavern at 6 p.m. And the food is great. We've got the garden outside. We've got a big table. We can all just chat amongst ourselves in the back of the pub, and it's a lovely place, recently refurbed, and you can park in Cabot Circus nearby. So that's the Punch Bowl Tavern on Old Market Street. And then the guys are going to come together with me to go to Weston-super-Mare in August the 11th. That's a Saturday. We're going to do 5 hours of activism, so that's 11 till 4 p.m, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. on the Weston-super-Mare Promenade. And we've got some great people coming, some activists that have done Hyde Park Corner recently. They'll be coming with some some cameras to take footage of the event. And I mentioned earlier, we've got 2 or 3 film crews that have approached me for various things. 2 of them are going to be there as well. So one of them is following my journey into flat Earth, and we're going to be doing some laser experiments across the River Severn, which should be interesting. And we're also going to do some long distance photography. And I did a recce yesterday. I've got a place nearby called the Kelston Roundhill. It's near Bristol. It's 677 feet up, and I can see right across the Severn Estuary into Wales, past the suspension bridge, the Severn Bridge, which is 17 miles away. Up behind it, I can see Sugarloaf, which is near Abergavenny. That's 42 miles away. And then behind that, I can see Pen y Fan, which is the Brecon Beacons. It's 2,000 feet up, but it's 55 miles away. Now, if I go on to Metabunk and do the calculations, that should be behind 2,000 feet of curvature, i.e. completely, pretty much hidden altogether. And I've done it with my own angle of elevation and all the things on metabunk.org, which is where most people go to do their curvature calcs. And I'm hoping that we can demonstrate this on the day with a professional film crew, and without a zoom camera we'll be able to see 55 miles away, and there's clearly a horizon meeting my eye level, and I was chuffed to bits. Even on my iPhone yesterday, I managed to capture it.
Great.
So that will be great fun. And like I say, the third film crew has just done an interview with me, just exploring my journey, and they're going to pop it on their YouTube channel. But a guy, I did a short film this Saturday, just gone, was down on the harbour side in Bristol. He can actually publish to film festivals, and he's already told me he's really pleased with the footage. So fingers crossed we're going to get a nice, clear, factual, open and honest interview. Now his methodology is to show the raw truth in someone's persona, because I've seen his previous work.
Okay.
He will take someone who's, for instance, an alcoholic, and tell that very raw story of their life, the tragedy and all of the elements that make up that person's life. And that's why I was happy to do the film, because I know he's going to do the right thing. He's going to tell it how it is and let the person tell the story. So
honest journalism.
Well, that's right. And thankfully he's a professional filmmaker and independent, and he sells his goods. He goes off to film festivals to get his goods out there, and fair play to him, he's done well. I think he's got a couple of million downloads on his own website, and he's done okay. So I'm really delighted that these are the spin-offs of the Bristol meetup, and not to mention, really, it's about relationship and connection. So for me, initially I did it because I didn't want to feel isolated in my own town. I knew that Bristol would have flat earthers. It just meant someone putting a peg in the sand, declaring a venue and a date, and making it regular, and the rest takes care of itself. The members, the people who come, they are what the group is all about, and I just take a back seat when we're there, just let people enjoy themselves and connect. And if something happens as a result, maybe some activism or another social outside of it, then fantastic. My job is complete. I've put people together, and that's how I see it.
Great. So for the listeners that are thinking, actually, I'm not too far, I'm in Swindon, or I'm in Bath, maybe I want to go to this event, but then they're still sort of maybe a bit unsure because they haven't heard as much information, or they might think that they don't know as much information as everybody else and they'll be a bit behind. Is it a mixture of lots of different sort of minds, sort of knowledge level wise, etc.? Or
yeah, absolutely. So some of the guys that come bring partners, friends who are just starting out, if not ever. Some have some completely not into it at all and walked away and decided, I might do some research, but that was nice to meet you, but that's not for me. But we have a real mixture, and what I love about it is it's very light and it's just good fun. So it's about people sharing their own journeys. How did you get into flat Earth? What your family like? What your friends like? How have you found it? What you're doing today? What's your favourite channels? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? Have you got a camera? Are you following the Hyde Park Speakers Corner events, etc., etc.? And I'll be sharing some of my recent updates where I'll be saying, do you want to come and do the laser experiment with me? Do you want to come out and do some activism?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get people involved as and when they want to. They don't have to be involved with any of it, but the actual meetup itself is just a chilled out evening where you can have some food, have a drink, socialise with people, and take it as far or not as far as you want. Just dip in and dip out. It's absolutely fine.
Sounds like a good inviting atmosphere and environment, and I encourage everybody who's local to that area to definitely attend. What's the best way to sort of get in contact with you? Is it via email address? Is it social media wise, Robin?
Yeah, so the two best places to go is my email address, which is Robin, ROBIN 3108 at hotmail.com, and I'll give you the details. Or if you go to meetup.com and then search Flat Earth Meetup Bristol, you'll see all the event details there as well. And you don't have to join Meetup, but you'll see that crop up every month, And if you do log an account with it, you just put your Christian name if you wish. It'll send you updates and reminders as time goes on.
Great. And we'll put full links below the video in the description box to yourself, your email address, etc. The meetup link.
You,
And
one more thing, actually, Nobles, I do have a YouTube channel. It's called Lifting the Lid, and you can subscribe to that channel, and that will always have a promo video released 2-3 weeks before, so that you can get a prompt there as well.
oh, great! Yeah, we'll add that to the description as well, so everyone will be able to literally listen to this and then click on any of the channels trusted. You'll get some additional subscribers after we upload this content. So it's been a great pleasure going through your journey and getting to know you a bit more as a person and seeing exactly what's going on down there in sunny Bristol. Trustfully, on the next meetup, I'll try and make an appearance myself so I can put a name to a face and maybe do some filming as well. Yeah, that'd be great. That'll definitely be great. You're not a million miles away, so I think that'll be a good thing to do. Definitely, I can see. Yeah, of course, that's no problem at all. And then we'll see how it goes with your filming and endeavors and stuff, and see how far that catapults you. Might be the UK's next version of Mark Sargent. You never know.
Well, he's got a great model, hasn't he? He uses his interviews to reach loads of people. So if I can emulate a fraction of what he does, I'll be absolutely delighted.
Definitely. But again, great having you on, and we will have you on again most definitely. The platform is always open to open-minded people who are sharing some different information. Most definitely.
Thank you, Nova. I'll be delighted. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.